Hello brothers and sisters, welcome to another episode here on Dangerous African Confessions HD. In this episode, we have another mind-blowing and one serious confession from one of our sisters from Nigeria. She had a lengthy conversation with us over phone and we had to rewrite and record it from her own perspective, which we decided to bring to you today. This revelation has to do with what she saw in her pastor's house when she was a servant in the house. To get to know much about her story, let us now go into what our sister has for us today. Please subscribe if you haven't done so, and also do like and share this video, so others out there can also benefit from this conversation, and hit the notification bell as well, so you will be notified anytime we upload videos.
I was born into a small, humble family where life moved at its own steady pace, and the seasons dictated everything. My name is Amora, and my story is a difficult one, but I want to still tell it, so maybe some might learn something from it. To talk about this story, let me tell you how I got to be in this pastor's house. You see, growing up, my parents were simple people, yet their love for me and each other was the kind that you could feel in everything they did. And they were everything to me. My father was the kind of man who walked into a room and immediately made you feel at ease. He had this deep, resonant voice that could comfort even the most troubled soul, and his laughter was contagious. He was a carpenter, and although we didn't have much in terms of wealth, we never went hungry. There was something about him that made people trust him, like he held the answers to life's questions even though he never sought attention or recognition. My mother was the quiet and soft-spoken type, but incredibly strong in ways that I only understood later in life. She was a seamstress, and though her hands were always busy sewing garments for people, her heart was even more dedicated to the Lord. The people around us knew her for her gentle spirit and her unwavering faith. She would often stay up late into the night praying for us, for her customers, for anyone who was hurting. When she prayed, you could feel God's presence in the room, like a warmth that wrapped around you and gave you peace. I happened to be their only child, and they tried their best to teach me to love and honor God above all else. They taught me that faith wasn't just about attending church or reciting prayers, it was about living with kindness, generosity, and humility. One thing about my parents is that they always gave what little they had to help others, never expecting anything in return. As a child, I believed that my family was invincible. I didn't realize how fragile life really was. I remember this one particular day so clearly, so vividly, that still feels like it just happened yesterday. It was a Sunday afternoon, and my father had finished his work early. He'd managed to build a beautiful wooden table for a family in the next village, and we were planning on delivering it together. My mother, always so graceful, was packing a small picnic for the trip. I was in the garden, picking flowers for the table, when I saw the car approach, our old, rusted family sedan. I watched my mother's face as she waved my father off. It was the last time I saw her smile like that. I remember the sound of tires screeching and the crash, sharp and sudden. It happened in a split second, but in my memory, it stretches on forever. You see, honestly, I had run to the road without thinking, without realizing what was happening. My father's voice, yelling my name, cut through the sound of the impact. But by the time I reached the scene, everything had changed. A truck, out of control, had swerved into their path. My parents were in the car, and the impact was so violent that the front of the vehicle was crushed beyond recognition. And in an instant, my entire world shattered. I remember seeing my father, bloodied, but alive like it is just today, his face twisted in pain as he called my name, begging me to stay away. I always remember my mother's hands, pale, lifeless, lying across her lap. It was then that I realized my life had just changed forever. My parents were gone, and I was left to navigate a world I wasn't prepared for. I stayed at the scene for hours, waiting for someone to tell me it was a bad dream, that they'd be fine. But they didn't wake up. The ambulance, the police, the people around, they all tried to pull me away, but I refused to leave. How could I? How could I leave the last remnants of the only people who had ever truly cared for me? In the months that followed, the grief consumed me. The people offered condolences, and many people came to say their goodbyes to my parents, but no one seemed to understand what it felt like to lose everything. They didn't understand that the only love I had known, the only safety I'd ever felt, was gone. The funeral was quiet. Too quiet. My parents' graves stood side by side, their names etched into the stone, and I felt like my entire future had been written in those cold letters. I was alone. My brother, after the accident, I had no one. My relatives lived far away, and though they offered to take me in, I could sense that they were all just as broken as I was. There was no warmth in their offers. It felt more like an obligation than a desire to care for me. So, I turned to the church. It was the only place where I could find a semblance of peace. That's when I first became close to the pastor. Pastor Uriel. He was a tall man, with dark, intense eyes and a smile that could melt your doubts. Everyone spoke so highly of him. They called him a man of God, and even though I'd grown up in the faith, something about him felt different. At first, I was skeptical. I had just lost my parents to a world I didn't understand, and I wasn't eager to place my trust in someone who seemed to have so much power over others. But Pastor Uriel's words were persuasive, and there was something in the way he spoke that made you feel like you mattered, like your pain had a purpose. His sermons were filled with promises of healing and restoration, and his presence was magnetic. One evening, after a particularly heartfelt sermon about overcoming grief and finding peace in God, he approached me. He must have seen the loneliness in my eyes because he asked me to come speak with him privately. He told me that he knows what it feels like to be lost. He talked to me as if he had always known me. He said that he can see the weight of my heart, and I should let him help me. His voice, so comforting and full of empathy, was enough to dissolve any reservations I had. What did I have left to hold on to? I agreed, and he offered me a place to stay at his home. At that point, I was desperate for any kind of comfort, so I moved in, believing that this would be the answer to my prayers. My brother, little did I know that this decision would set me on a path that would take me years to escape, a path that would lead to nightmares I never imagined. But back then, I had no idea how deeply entangled my fate was about to become with his. When he took me under his wing, offering me a place to stay in his home, I felt like I had found a second family. So, I moved in with him, eager to learn and grow in faith. But over time, strange things began to happen. You see, at first, everything seemed normal, until I noticed something unsettling. The pastor would often disappear late at night, and I would hear strange hissing sounds coming from his study. Yes, I got to the house and lived there until it all started. Yes, at this point I had spent 2 or 3 years or so in the house. He is such a prophet who sees with so much accuracy. And I felt good to be under his wings, or to say, I felt good to be living in such a person's house. Yes, it all changed with a feeling I began to have. It was something very strange. This is because I have been in this house all these years and never felt such things. You see, when you have this sense that something wasn't quite right. It had been building for months, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Every night, I would lie awake in my room, the sounds of the house growing still around me. I'd hear the pastor's footsteps, faint but deliberate, moving from his study to the back of the house. I had always assumed it was just his late-night study sessions or private prayers, as he was known to be a deeply devoted man. But something in the air had changed, an unease that clung to me, growing heavier as the days passed. I began to notice odd things during the day as well. The people who came to him for guidance seemed different. They were no longer simply content with his sermons. Their eyes had a distant, almost vacant look in them, as if they were under some kind of trance. When they spoke of the pastor's prophecies, it was with reverence bordering on fear. No one seemed to ask questions, least of all me. I was still young, still healing from the loss of my parents, and I wanted so badly to believe that he was the man of God he claimed to be. But that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. One evening, after a particularly long day, I couldn't sleep. It was well past midnight, and it was as if sleep was finally taking over me. That was when I started having the dreams that will eventually become real in the physical life. The dreams started innocently enough, at least, that's what I told myself at first. They began just a few months after I had settled into living with Pastor Uriel. In the beginning, they were vague, fleeting shadows in my mind. I would wake up, heart pounding, but with no clear memory of what I had dreamed. Just an overwhelming feeling of unease, of something wrong. But they grew darker, more vivid, and soon I couldn't escape them. It was in the last 3 years, after I had learned the truth about the python and its place in Pastor Uriel's rituals, that the dreams became something far worse. Something beyond my control. I can still remember the first one. I woke up, breathless, my sheets tangled around me, my skin slick with sweat. I had been dreaming of the snake, its long, sinuous body curling and slithering around me, its scales glinting in the dim light of the dream. But it wasn't just a serpent. It was alive in ways I couldn't understand. It wasn't just a physical creature anymore, it felt like it had become part of me. In that dream, I was lying on a cold, stone floor, the python's massive body coiling around me. At first, I felt fear, terror, really, as it tightened around my limbs. But then, the strangest thing happened. It wasn't just fear I felt. It was something else, intimacy, as though the snake and I were no longer separate, as if we shared a bond so deep, so ancient, that I couldn't comprehend it. The sensation of the python's smooth, cold skin sliding against mine made my heart race, but in ways I couldn't explain, it felt familiar, almost comforting, as though the creature was a part of me. When I woke up from that dream, my entire body was shaking. I could still feel the pressure of its body around mine, the phantom sensations lingering on my skin like a curse. My mind screamed for me to reject it, but the emotions were so complex, so conflicted, that I couldn't even make sense of them. I had prayed fervently that night, asking God to take away the nightmares, to protect me from whatever was trying to invade my mind. But it only got worse. The dreams became more frequent, more intense, until they were the only thing I could think about. Every time I closed my eyes, I was there again, entangled with the snake, its cold body winding around mine in a grotesque dance. It didn't matter where I was or how hard I tried to fight it, the dreams came, uninvited and relentless. I felt trapped, suffocated by them. In the dreams, I was no longer just an observer. The python's touch became more invasive, its coils tightening around my chest, its tongue flicking against my skin. And the worst part was that it wasn't just a physical sensation, it was spiritual, too. The snake would enter me, its body flowing through my veins like a dark river, merging with my soul. I could feel its presence deep inside me, and with each passing night, it became harder to tell where I ended and the snake began. Sometimes, the dream would stretch on for hours, each moment more disturbing than the last. I would wake up gasping for air, my chest tight, my body trembling as if the python had never left me. I tried to pray, to beg for God's mercy, but the more I prayed, the stronger the dreams became. It was as though the python was feeding off my fear, growing more powerful with each plea for help. I could feel its power inside me, wrapping around my very being, trying to claim me as its own. And that's when the confusion began to tear at my mind. Why was I having these dreams? Why was the snake here, in my mind, in my soul? It didn't make sense. I knew it wasn't natural, no sane person could believe it was, but the feeling, the connection, it felt so real, so undeniable, that I began to question everything I knew. I tried to resist, I tried to fight it. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart hammering in my chest, praying to God to take the snake away from me. But the dreams didn't stop. So, one evening when the pastor had returned back home, I told him about the dreams I have been having, and to see if he can help me in prayer. When I told him, he smiled and told me that there was nothing really wrong and that he would do certain directions for me to make sure it does not come again. And so, for about a month or two, I didn't have that dream again. Only for it to return later, but this time, the grew worse, more vivid, more desperate. It was as if the python was trying to possess me, filling me with its darkness, pushing me further into a corner I could not escape. And then, one night, it changed. I was in the dream again, but this time, I was no longer lying helpless on the floor. The snake was there, as always, but now it was standing, its massive form towering over me. And there, standing beside it, was Pastor Uriel, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. He was smiling, but it wasn't the kind smile. It was predatory, like he knew something I didn't. "You belong to him now," Pastor Uriel's voice echoed in my mind, cold and final. "He is your guide. Your protector. Your connection to the power you've been searching for." I remember the python's eyes locked onto mine, and in that moment, I felt a sickening surge of recognition. It wasn't just a snake. It was the vessel, the medium, through which Uriel communicated with the darkness. It was the force that had been entwining itself with my spirit, trying to claim me as its own. I woke up in a panic, my chest heaving, my breath coming in sharp gasps. But the nightmare didn't fade. The feeling of the snake's cold coils wrapping around me lingered. It wasn't until one night, I said I was not going to sleep in order not to experience the dreams again. That was when I heard the familiar sound of Pastor Uriel's footsteps as he moved through the halls. But this time, something was different. The air was a soft hiss, like the wind through the trees, but it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. I could feel my pulse quicken as I sat up in bed, straining my ears to listen. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, I knew something was off. Honestly, why I did this, I cannot even tell. I pushed the covers aside and crept from my room. The house was dark, save for the dim light that filtered through the crack of the study door. I held my breath as I inched closer, and through the gap that was between the door and its frame, I could see him, standing, his back to me, facing a large, old wooden table. I froze in place, my heart pounding in my chest. At first, I couldn't see anything clearly. But then I heard it, the sound that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The unmistakable hiss of a snake. I got a little closer, and my eyes straining to make sense of what I was seeing. And there it was, coiled around the pastor's feet, an enormous python, just like I had been seeing in my dreams. Its scales glistening in the dim light like dark jewels. The snake's body was thick and long, winding in serpentine patterns across the floor, its eyes unblinking and cold, its tongue flicking in and out, tasting the air. I took a step back, my heart racing. My mind screamed that this couldn't be happening, that this wasn't real, but my body couldn't move.
Don't forget to please subscribe, share and like our videos. Kindly hit the notification bell so you will be the first to get notification to our videos when we upload. Let me what our father from our previous episode said, we should seek God righteously, know Him for ourselves. No pastor can be an intermediary between you and your Father. That is exactly the point many are missing. This is so true because you cannot know or trust where these pastors do get their source from. And you cannot be receiving blessing and directions, same as prophecies from the dark powers and think you are not tied to them. You came to this world alone with everything that you need to be the best version of yourself intact and inside of you. You don't need any pastor to help you do it. It takes only you to discover the Christ consciousness in you. Then again, I will say that, we do not do this to shame others but to warn the innocent ones that, the devil doesn't come with horns and a pitchfork. He comes dressed as everything you've ever wanted. So, to those listening, stay vigilant. Pray for discernment. And remember, no earthly reward is worth your soul. True faith doesn't demand secrecy or fear. It uplifts, it heals, and it sets you free. By sharing this journey, we hope it can spare someone else the pains our brothers and sisters endure. Let every story we share be a reminder that, not every voice that claims to speak for God is worthy of your trust. Protect your heart, your mind, and your soul. They are precious beyond measure, just like she said. Let your inner man or spirit walk anytime you meet any man who tells you he or she is a man of God, so that you will be able to know the lies from the truth. You see, faith when placed in the wrong hands can also be a weapon, one that can destroy you. I beg you, brothers and sisters, ask questions. Pray for discernment. Test the spirits, as the Bible says. Do not let anyone guilt you into giving beyond your means or participating in things that feel wrong in your spirit. I hope that this will be a lesson etched in the heart of those who dare to tread the fine line between faith and fanaticism. Stay safe. Stay vigilant. And always question the source of power before you place your trust in it. If you've ever been in a similar situation, or if you feel something's not right in your church or community, leave a comment below. Let's talk about it. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for more true stories, because sometimes, the scariest things aren't the ones we see, they're the ones we don't.